know me. I'm Joe Lambert. I'm the founder and now facilitator at Miratai for the Story Center. I retired from Story Center after 42 years in July. But I'm really, really happy to have you all here. We're going to turn it over to Guillemette and Roberta and Gang for their presentation today on co-imagining. And I have to say of all the presentations I read that came through our window, your guys excited me the most because of the way you were framing this. So it's all yours. I don't know who was driving, Guillemette. You seem to have the slides, so whichever one of you wants to take over, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you. I will just share the slide and Roberta will kick the intro.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for hosting us. Thank you for this warm beginning. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
So, hello all. We are artists, writers, researchers convening today for this conference around practices towards interoperable imaginaries. I'm going to put now in the chat, I'm going to paste a link to an Access copy. So if you feel that you have the need to follow, you can follow us from there. Let me just do that. All right. So, converging in the question of a polycrisis and the possibility of operating other imaginaries, we come together in this format for the first time, actually, to understand if and how our methods can uphold, expand, and interweave with each other's practices with and beyond our individual inquiries. We ask, how can different ways of knowing and documenting come into contact? And how can surprising coalitions, remembered networks, and reimagined infrastructures be formed without collapsing into ever-flattening sameness? So our panel takes the shape of 3 rehearsals of each of our practices to create a site for interoperability towards modes of sustaining, resilience, and solidarities. Through these rehearsals, we navigate the way we work with levels of transparency, obscurity, knowledge source, knowledge permission, expertise, and the material and semiotic conditions required for our different practices. Our methods include cosmogram making as a practice for climate infrastructure reimagining, reconfiguration and interoperability of climate infrastructure imaginary, drop-in rehearsals as site-specific situations for sharing concerns with environmental governance that inventorize aesthetic and narrative strategies together, and decolonial listening as contributing to a less dominant relation to the world within the context of colonial inheritance. By bringing these methods together, we hope to provide a connective tissue of specificities from which then language, representations, listening situations, and other forms of fable-making practices get to manifest. So we will now introduce each of our practices.
The practice of climate cosmograms inquire into the technopolitics and worlding capacity of climate modeling infrastructure through the lens of cosmogram making, a description of how Earth become worlds, a constructed imaginary of Earth. The practice intersects climate model, gaming, and cosmogram making to document and reimagine Earth's computation otherwise. I will rehearse 3 cosmogrammatic stories about climate computation through drawing 3 sets of cards from the game Model Fatigue, and I will interpret how they constellate into a climate cosmogram. Here, the game Model Fatigue is practiced as a climate tarot to experiment with the reinterpreting and reimagining of climate computational infrastructure.
We will share some reflections on how drop-ins are setups for and about telling stories. Stories that are so close and mundane that might escape the status of narrowability in research environments, but which are precisely the ones carrying important amounts of complexity along. Materializing them in place and time means allowing them to provoke further questions, invoke concerns, or convoke solidarity. Hence, for us as militant researchers, the method of drop-in sessions is an activator of energies to join up the struggles against green and chrome transition regimes by other means. We will share 2 rehearsals of drop-ins and 1 reflection on the drop-in format itself.
Decolonial listening practices are associated with justice and seen as pivotal in addressing historical wounds, sustaining engagement with diverse perspectives. So I work with a listening practice to encounter the material acoustic environment of an inherited, listed, Luso-Brazilian heritage house. I practice an embodied approach that lays the groundwork for listening as a method to engage with colonial heritage and inheritance, asking how to inherit otherwise. In my storied rehearsals, I will share personal stories of being in and listening to the Sobrado house. Listening in conviviality becomes my practice, intermeshing academia and life between global north and south. We will now interweave our practices by taking turns reading one story at a time.
For this first rehearsal, I will draw 3 cards that will define the forces at play in the cosmogram that will be conjured. The first card, I have drawn fully automated luxury communism, describing the belief system of the cosmogram, a belief that the only salvation in the polycrasis is full automation and high-tech abundance to form an equal society premised on an extreme supply. Second card, the future. I have drawn speed, a core modality of computation. Third card, the elements. I have drawn human. To interpret how this card constellates in a cosmogram, I will use a personal story of my encounter with a supercomputer, Mare Nostrum, at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, which is housed in the sacred site of a chapel. This is a tale of a supercomputer enshrined in a church, and how it tells a specific cosmological imaginary of Earth, the sacralization of speed and technology through the aesthetic of religion, embodying the prophetic nature of climate science. In this story, I follow oceanographer and collaborator Joan Hjort into the chapel that was desacralized to host the scientific center and was later on secularly resacralized when the supercomputer was enshrined at the heart of the chapel. It was in April 2024 that I first visited the Barcelona Supercomputer Center, guided by Joan, a glass building branded by the oil company Repsol, long open space and rows of hot desks, and more the allure of a startup than your typical geoscience department in the basement of an underfunded university. A heavy wooden door, prolonged by a stone wall, clashed with a slightly dated Silicon Valley-inspired look of the previous site. Passing through this door felt like crossing through a temporal portal. Joan's voice was playing in the background. The atmosphere changed. We had left the synthetic air of the AC for what felt like a naturally cooler environment. The light has drastically softened, stripped from its cool, all over achieving lighting to the warmth of the sun, diffracted and colored through stained glass window. We reached a footbridge when his voice pulled me out of my state of dazed, and he hit my brain with the words, Mare Nostrum, our sea. I followed Joan's finger, pointing down, and there it was, the Mare Nostrum, our sea of cable, fans, blinking LED, data floating through rows of server trays. I overhang this supercomputer, encapsulated in a glass box, like a precious specimen to be scrutinized, the inner belly of Earth's simulation, visible from above and all at once. Joan asked me if I had heard the chant in the background. I then realized that the state I was in was partly induced by humming voices coming from an unseen location. These voices were identified later on as an album of Gregorian song played for the visitors. Everything felt anachronic from this point of view. The humming of a Gregorian supermachine, a computational sea, a data lake from the ruins of a Roman Empire. We continue by descending a staircase in the abyss of the chapel towards the main entrance of the Mare Nostrum. Here it was again, one of the most powerful machines, perfectly enshrined in the altar of a chapel. The juxtaposition of a supercomputer, the ultimate expression of gross-led science, with the solemn spirituality of the chapel should have clashed, but it didn't. This presaging was somehow a very convincing aesthetic performance of technoscience and the ultimate sacralization of its prophetic nature. The chapel and the supercomputer, two sanctuaries of cosmological production, nested in one another, a hybridizing of spiritual and synthetic earth imaginary. Both sanctuaries mediated by a different set of beliefs, but rooted in the same prophetic culture, the premise of abundance and human salvation through omniscience from the divine to computation. The cosmogram already exists, and its reinterpretation is called prophetic computing and imperial modeling.
On the second day of the festival, we arrived rather early and found a table surrounded by 2 sofas, one on either side, which would later become a place of rest for friends and strangers, making us stop after attending workshops, meeting each other accidentally and catching up, or gathering energy to do a round of the floor. Rolling the paper down on which we had taken notes the day before, adding more notes next to the tech worker for a local leftist political party, arguing against the use of AI in the production of their documents. Next to the diagram of the climate activists' story of a bridge in Grenoble being set on fire in protest of the expansion of a microchip factory. Next to the note of Pegasus software being used to plant incriminating documents on academics' computers in South India, so that there is more space for new conversations and new questions to be added. We laid out the zines, the stickers, some which had been gifted to us, some of which we had made, some of which we felt important to carry with us. Even AI dreams of its own obsolescence, cloud abolition, dual abuse. Stickers receive company from other groups passing by. Tech Workers Coalition, Mastodon instance administrators, technologists setting up collective infrastructure for squats, sex worker organizations, local hacker spaces, agroecologists trying to weave resistance in times of distress. We inhabit a ready-made context, a festival that has been going on for 10 years and which has provided grounds for meeting between grassroots groups, campaigns, and individuals who are active in struggles around feminism, queerness, anti-racism, decoloniality, international solidarity, climate, labor, migration. The building is part of a citywide restructuring, pushing progressive organizations to the outskirts, now in an area where Moroccan and Turkish people are also displaced. A former school in a neighborhood which was also a site of big riots in the 80s between squatters and the state.
Stories of resistance, of compliance, of anxiety, of intervention are shared across this table. People sit or stand at the table, often lingering for a longer and more intimate discussion. They are met with an appreciative listener, an enraged responder, an exhausted, tearful discussant, an excited anecdote sharer, to receive the breath of being alive in scenes of infrastructural rampage. Some stories are well crafted already as counter-narratives, formed into well-documented issues or campaigns that the people who drop in want to cherish or amplify by retelling the story. However, more often than not, sometimes it starts with an interest in what is being tabled here, some in the form of request for advice on an infrastructural proposal in their work, school, town, domesticity. Some share needing the space to be able to articulate confusion, ambiguity, guilt, shame. personal anecdotes bridge lived experience with its political implications, forming a sense of scale, perhaps what poet June Jordan describes as the importance of attending to the comprehensive impact of everywhere, of any place. After we discuss what it meant to be there in place for people who chose to listen to our stories or to share theirs, how we are in relation to this personally, structurally, historically, geographically, politically. Therapist, legal advisor, friend, opponent, witness. There are some of the words that we use to describe our experience as we stand at the roadside clutching bags of leaflets and rolled up posters. Intimate moments that might, for a moment, allow space for an authentic connection, of being accepted as to tell stories as a way of articulating an ambiguous political scene. The drop-in unravels rehearsing as the act of resistance in very small and intimate moments, as the practice of making something otherwise that might allow us to connect intimate places to a larger political realities.
Prelude. Tânia Rivera's exploration of Lygia Clark's artistic practice foregrounded a feminist inversion of the anthropophagic metaphor. This framework of reversal and bodily relationality opened an important window onto the experience of diasporic and colonized identities, and serves as a bridge to contemporary lived realities of cultural negotiation. Oswald de Andrade's 1928 Anthropophagic Manifesto declared Brazil's artistic and cultural capaciousness through the metaphor of cannibalism, the devouring of the colonizer's culture in order to digest, transform, and reconfigure it into something new, Brazilian, Tupi or not Tupi. That is the question, he wrote, collapsing Shakespearean modernity with indigenous presence. Rivera contextualizes Clark's oeuvre, proposing that it reverses this gesture. Anthropophagy in Clark becomes an inquiry into what cannot be digested, the resistant, the traumatic, the other. Anthropophagic Slobber from 1973, as an act of exposure of being in the world, expands Rivera, is the phantasmatic of the body, not the body itself, the lived experience. In Rivera's reading, a feminist counter-anthropophagic politics that resists the phallic logic of ownership and linear identity. Challenging the idea that to know something is to make it one's own, to incorporate it as property, an idea central both to patriarchy and colonialism. In this sense, Clark's practice performs what Rivera calls, quote, a shared rejection of the colonizer, not by offering a singular counter-identity, but by proposing an alteritarian identity, one constituted through relational difference and refusal. The self is not fixed, but structured through discontinuities, fabulations, lived contradictions. It is not what can be said or owned, but what might resist saying or being owned altogether. Rehearsal 1. I must have been 6 years old, hiding behind Isabel, my mother. The year is 1987. It is this landscape and this new old house that will capture my biographical notion of home. The interior is absolute destruction. I don't remember the garden, most likely because there was none, but a huge banana grove, bananal. It was that banana grove that made the heirs reject Isabel. Object of affection, living identity, living entity, small divergences that sealed how they would relate to us. Inside, the inner partitions are down, there's streaks of light flashing through the holes in the roof. The wooden floorboards are covered in dust, debris, pieces of mortar, lime, and earth particles. Original newspapers and wallpapers dated to around 1840 set some kind of record, and the greenish hue on the walls become part of an effort to put together a material assemblage that will later be lost. Outside, the cladding is being chiseled away, bricks and stones are exposed, stray dogs bark, horses ride by with men on chariots, sometimes filled with sugarcane stalks. Chiseling, chipping sounds, knocking walls down, pounding, hammering, and beating, staccatos, a bringing down of plaster, popping sounds, hammers on stone, mortar cracking, loud hammer blows. A ghastly work. Calls for colonial accountability have given rise to the destruction of colonial symbols as celebratory representations of the colonial past and its systemic injustices. What Quilombola Antônio Bispo dos Santos refers to as counter-colonial finds parallels with Maria de Rosario Acosta Lopes' Grammar of Listening. Their work testifies to colonial trauma and the practices that have formed in silence to resist it. Lopes asks, what is this listening that has to do with the profound responsibility of listening to the silent, yet unconcealable, quote, requiring new grammars to be truly understood, believed, rendered audible and legible. Vasquez amplifies decolonial forms of listening and the transformations they demand and require, opening towards materiality by proposing that colonial buildings and monuments become, quote, an undeniable evidence and testimony of coloniality, and possible sites for subversion and resistance. Subverting the colonial narrative means accounting for what it erases, including historical violence and interdependencies between human and more than human beings. Conviviality proposes a being living with difference, forging counter-hegemonic narratives and uprooting historically produced hierarchies. In keeping with Haraway, stories make worlds. Just as the Sobrado House is listed as a valuable cultural historical record, likewise today, we understand conditions such as sites that have an absence of birds because of climate change, also as a record and testimony of coloniality.
In this second cosmogrammatic rehearsal, I have drawn the following cards. First card, degrowth, for belief system, a political ideology that stands for the scaling down of destructive and unnecessary form of production to reduce material and energy use. Second card, lunar, a feature of computation to rethink the construction of time in climate models. Third element card, I have drawn mineral. First, I'm trying to align the belief system and feature cards. Degrowth and lunar, as they seem to belong on the same plane of thought. They constellate in the description of a new rhythm, a new pace, to sync with the Earth. Time in climate model is linearly constructed and hard-coded within the technical imaginary of time series, which are a sample of climate data modeled against time, where for each point in time, there is a corresponding data point. Climate models are trained to dig into past data, excavating memories of past climates to make assumptions about the future. Most climate model memories start around the year 1800 in Europe, at the Industrial Revolution, and simulate future as far as the year 2300. Climate models convey a specific cosmological reading of world history, one characterized by the industrialization of imperialist nations. The encoding of computational time into a Eurocentric history becomes linearly universalized and totalized through simulating Earth. By scaling and averaging the future, further distancing human relationships to Earth reality, and the located accountability of the model's history, to borrow Lucy Sushman. In climate computation, the future is not only linearly simulated, but also linearly and recursively traveling back to the present, leaving indelible traces on the here and the now. Coming back to the card I have drawn, the lunar cycle becomes the temporality through which climate computation simulates Earth. The lunar model moves away from the linear logic of modeling, slowing down the pace of how computation mediates human relationship to the cosmos, decelerating how Earth becomes worlds. I come back to the element card, mineral. This card intuitively brings the memory of my birthplace in Bretagne, an element of stone drawing a circle in the ground, a memory of long story being shared, of the making of worlds in the long summer nights, sitting with friends in a circle of stones. In this cosmogram, I think of stone alignment as a portal for the manifestation of time, an embodiment of Earth's movements. Their position are a repository of the sun's and moon's light, casting shadow to manifest Earth's cyclical time. What happens if we think of stone alignment as a form of Earth's computation, a form of recording and simulation of Earth that connects Earth's living with cosmic times? In this secular temporality, speed is no longer sacralized, but instead is attuned to Earth's rhythm. In this form of computing, the stones and their alignments are a place of ritual where data points are replaced with shared story about the Earth. A lunar model is manifested into a stone arrangement as an embodiment of earthly time. The computation of climate occurs through world making and in the act of gathering, observing Earth's movement, and creating portals to the cosmos. The cosmogram is called spinning a lunar model into a stone computer, and it is the first step in thinking through time, otherwise in climate model infrastructure.
We prepared for our second drop-in session in northern circumstances. This time we decided we would approach drop-in as a collective read-write situation. We knew already that the group we were about to meet had been working together for a while. At that point, we could not yet imagine how moving more south would affect us meteorologically, but also methodologically. This meant we would take care of the drop-in situation collectively. For the welcome dinner, we prepared pieces of paper that could slip into pockets and between pages of notebooks, formulaic elements to which questions and stories could stick over the days. A few days later, we gathered on the tiny chairs of the local school empty for the summer. Participants arrived late to the workshop with a baking dish doubling as a tray, stacked with 2 flasks of freshly made coffee, milk, sugar, and enough cups for everyone. Our plan was to write formulas together as a way to reconfigure stories of energy and transition, as a way to not just tell, but also retell, changing our stories as we went. We adapted the method to accommodate participants who expressed a desire to formulate the complexities together and wanted to let go of exercising individually. The second half of the session happened first hesitantly, but then quickly grew animated when we started to cross formulations between each other, discussing and exchanging about the ways in which the formulas rearticulated shared questions and questions particular to our own practice. We arrived at lunchtime, and some of us continued, others joined again later to discuss each other's proposals one by one in the shade of a tree. In the grass, a mouse and some ants crossed our bodies. We took a few hours looking at each other's notebooks, peeking at the formulas as if cheating at an exam. Our newly acquired formulaic language that allowed us to calculate contested efficiency for digestion through time perception, weakening hegemony, Kalima dust, collective energy banking, hopelessness chains and social energy, vibration of forms across territories, and inventing new operators like nothinging or but ing.
After sharing days of roaming in a very hot rural area, and after an intense session of chewing on political economies, time dimensions, and definitions of energy communities, participants have an almost contradictory urge to escape and stay longer. A swimming pool ends up being a perfect setup for a method relying on inventive formulaic writing and reading. There is something also about the political fiction writing of the read-write collectivization that shows to be very specific when the group is mostly composed of artists with critical practice on the green transition. We wonder how such proposal would fall for a more scientific folk or for policy-savvy participants. This makes us aware of how drop-ins need to be set up with a certain elasticity and then stretched or disoriented according to the epistemic sensibilities in place and in change. On that line, what does drop-in mean? Then, if the preparedness of the adaptativeness need to distribute their weight almost live, how to stay with methodological sharpness in the midst of the by definition tense, contradictory, uncertain, and shape-shifting realm that transitions are. Who drops what, how, when, and where?
Rehearsal 2. At material and spiritual level, the layered histories that the house sits on and itself engulfs means a thickening parcel of the work in front of me is to learn to listen to, think, and feel with and through the materiality evidence in the house and place. Wanting to decenter or disturb, reconsider, rearrange the way history is made to center the dominance of some, prevailing over the oppression, submission of others, then going back to the lime, the earth, the wood and rocks, will involve centering them and the labor of those who forcibly shaped and erected this place, those who before them were shaping the land and the terrain, and those who insist on being and returning. What is still here? It is all here. All is already here. So who is my treaty, my contract with and for? At under or ground level, the ownership felt in terms of affection, juridical claim and responsibility evicts my own feelings of property. I try to compensate for this with the learning I need to do, centering a prehistory, the more than human animacies, spirits, presences, and human expressions that tell me of coloniality. To think, feel, as Marisol de la Cadena puts it, with them as a pathway to relearning this house, this place. If my practicing decolonization means accounting for my own complicity within how things are or can be lived and construed, it is difficult to figure out what relationship I can envision with the Açorian heirs whom we'd bought the house from, my ties to the house, the local community, myself. Though my sense of belonging and affection for this house, this place is undisputed, though a great part of the work is acknowledging what comes with the transatlantic concurrence that made this colonized place. The toughest complexity is to try and disentangle an ingrained coloniality where the house stands as its monument, with its descendants as embodied enablers, and me, a bug in the wheel. As usual, in the warm months, I am barefoot. I walk up and down the cobblestone path, feeling the large, smooth stones that contour the soles of my feet. It is such an old sensation that I can't help but feel completely part of this place. I turn and see the white, lime-washed wall matte, almost like velvet, the skin of a peach. The openings, windows and doors, the smell of wood so characteristic of old houses. I will never be able to find home away from this. Very early, the thrush, woodpecker, toucan, marmoset, rufous hornero, sparrow, southern lapwing, gray kiskadee, southern house wren, blue butterfly, seagull, frigate bird, vulture, aracuan bird. From the top of the house, prostrate on the hill that rises even higher, I look at Lagoa da Conceição and hear many things. I feel in the thickness of the walls the things I know and the things I don't recognize. I know little about the people who migrated, colonized, in fact, colonized this land, the people from whom the house descends. They still are those who call themselves natives. They are they still, full of superstition, so much so that it filled the air, making it almost solid. The ceremonies practiced and the stories told inside the houses also generate the atmospheric quality that uniquely shapes the colonial architecture of this parish. Listening. Time was very serene at first. It took me weeks to start recording the sounds inside and around the house, a method proposed by my life research. I still felt shy about the technology and the artificiality of performing a certain capture of the bodies present, which in fact have no beginning or end, but which enter and leave the acoustic environment of the house. This question persists. How can we practice a listening that is a learning to listen beyond dominance, as Rolando Vasquez writes about decolonial listening? If capturing is already dominance, and if defining the beginning and end of a listening, de uma escuta, already means becoming modern, above the agency of the body sound that I listen to, I try to think that the sounds will bring me a past future today that speaks beyond the beauty of this place, of the violence endured by human and more than human bodies, of displacement, of expropriation, of the dominion that adapts the colonial project. The house, a colonial landmark in a Brazil that was already empire, in the sounds, with the sounds, to identify sources of temporalities available through histories, stories, tales, and atmospheres of this site that is architectural heritage, but which is also, and I don't believe it is only in our reverie, an archaeological site. No, a land territory of the Homem do Sambaqui, our prehistoric middens man, perhaps their observatory, which is also the land territory of Maracatu, the land territory of the Aracuã, the Pitanga, the Gambá. Perhaps there is a language that expresses these atmospheres, spaces and landscapes, these bodies and their stories, their tales, their sounds that reverberate and that also expose the coloniality-modernity paradigm. Perhaps there is a reflexivity in relating to the colonial legacy, enabling the listening of countless latencies through material, affective, sonorous, sonic practices.
In the third rehearsal, the first card I draw is queer ecology for belief system, a thinking refuting the normative categorizations, binaries, and hierarchical classification of earthly being. The second card, I've drawn is gridless, a feature of computation that seeks other computational architecture than the modeling grid. And finally, for the third element card, I've drawn fungi. The first card that draws my attention is Gridless, a computational imaginary that has probably crossed the mind of many artists, queer and feminist practitioners who have worked to emancipate Earth's imaginary from a mesh of control, domination, and the long legacy of the brutal colonial segmentation of Earth into wedges to master time. The grid is at the core of computational infrastructure, as this model cannot compute the Earth in a continuum. They have to break a very large problem into thousands of pieces. When modeling the Earth, the segmentation is done so that each grid cell is computed separately and in parallel to compute a planetary scale simulation. This parallel computing has a totalizing effect and implies a systematic standardization of modeling practices and the worldwide averaging of values and representations. And in turn, certain realities get obscured, deformed, and erased in the process. If we look back at the constellation of cards, how does the grid compute fungi when the escape is very computational logic? The substance renders irrelevant the very binaries of computation. They even slip out of most computation resolution. Their incomputability removes them from Earth simulated reality. If fungi are not stored in the Earth modeling system, in its digital twin, will they exist in the future that is being actualized as we speak? In these grid imaginaries, frictions occurring at the intersection of modeling practices are muted, but this intersection in the grid are more than averaging technical system. They render homogeneous and in the process, desaturate the multiplicity of practice, languages, and cosmological imaginaries that traverse the grid. Recently, US-based chip manufacturer NVIDIA has claimed to have developed a gridless model, a new AI-mediated climate model able to describe the Earth system without the segmentation of differential equations. But NVIDIA's gridless imaginary is not actually gridless. Their models still operate in the grid regime of climate infrastructure. AI is just a superficial layer that defies traditional and physical modeling. It does not consider the ontoepistemology of the grid. It's just a linguistic apparatus, a branding strategy for further smoothness, speed, and performing objectivity. In this cosmogram, the incomputability of fungi is a feature of emancipation and is used to distort, expand, and break the implacability of the grid. The grid becomes a fungi network that defy the grid logic, where each cell or intersection are more than statistical geometries, but a complex ramified network for survival. In this cosmogram, gridless is to think about computation at different scale. As Max Liboiron describes it, scale is about which relationship matters in a specific context. In the fungi network model, climate computation is reimagined as a site where practice of inquiring the Earth does not merge but multiply. It's not about standardization, but about interpreting radical divergence. In this fungi network model, friction becomes a feature. The joint is no longer a site for knowledge erasure toward planetary scale computation, but a site for cooperation and renegotiation of plural Earth worlds. These network ramifications are incomplete, uneven stitches, and efficient bridging, but in the winding of this ramified path, multiple worlds can coexist. The intersection between model and imaginaries of Earth does not become a thin, undisturbed line curving around the globe, but a site of struggle, divergence, and solidarity between Earth's cosmology. This cosmogram is titled Fungi Computation for Gridless Earth, and is the first step into reimagining pluralistic computation.
A drop-in session clinic situation table is a situation that welcomes porosity, provides a sense of reciprocity, in support of co-constitutive knowledge practices, a context that is made as part of an event, situation, or activity organized by others, which overlaps with our concerns, a possibility for knowing who we are, where we are, an occasion for collective articulation of pressing matters by those around the table, but it is not always a table. A space for circulation of our own and other collectives' stories. Both being prepared but not scripted and making space for improvisation. Happens in a place where we already have a ground. A space for sharing non-expert knowledge. a few days or maybe an hour, but durational. A method for listening differently to each other, an invitation to speak otherwise about concerns, a moment of collective rearticulation.
When the vocabularies for naming or knowing the problem of greenwashing and computationally infused green colonialism converge across collective struggles and the immediate material surroundings of the communities who engage with such problems also converge. How to detect when we are reproducing methods because of their inertias in certain political spaces? Or in other words, what is happening and how might we stay aware of our own reproduction of talkative methods, discourse-oriented forms of problematization, or consensus-based modes of recognition of togetherness? The drop-ins have a long tail of their own, morphing from drop-in clinics to drop-in tables to drop-in formulas and continuing to shape-shift with the people and contexts who pick it up. The porosity of the drop-ins expands. The drop-in table is remade to fit a gathering around tech and Palestine. The drop-in formulas are picked up by one of the participants and repeated with residents of Extremadura to generate narratives against the solutionist imposition of technologies. As the format shapeshifts, so does the work of reciprocal collective articulation oriented towards the concrete side of the energy transition.
Rehearsal 3. I wake up to the sounds of the Aracuan bird, etymological origin Tupi language, Aracua. Their voice, a squeaky duet at daybreak, alarmed screams. Tuesday, February 13th. The windows are open. A buzzing starts from the streets. I hear deep percussion from up the hill by the church as people gather around the house and up the historical cobblestone path. Slowly, the percussion gets closer and then suddenly recedes, just before the shapes of dancing bodies start to show. They carry a handmade banner and wear bright colors, glitter, flowers. Like a cascading force, the whole of a Hastaira Maracatu group comes down the path, singing, playing, dancing. The courting of the Congolese king and queen parade by. The musicians and dancers follow. Then the deep beats stop, and all start singing a cappella, a wave of voices. The instruments pick up again, the dancers take to the streets, their skirts swirling in a helicoidal movement. It starts raining. The procession continues downhill, resonating for a long while. Some days and some nights, the beetle digs through the sand between the paving stones, leaving a tiny mound, representative of its efforts. We hear earth, lime, and sand particles fall to the ground. I think the bat is also poking matter down a small hole in the external wooden beam. To listen to this house is to circumvent my own intimacy as a decolonial practice in the collective space between historical struggle and my own positionality, an abyssal listening.
Well, this is these were the last words of the part of the presentation that we prepared to be read. Thank you everyone for bearing with us. In Guillemets' words, I think what we prepared was uneven stitches, or like a bunch of stories with maybe uneven stitches between them. But also, in Roberta's words, a wave of voices. So we also wanted to open this space for other voices to join if they want. We have we are aware that the reading and the stories are like very different from one another and quite thick in themselves. So yeah, this is an open invitation to join us in a conversation, and we are very happy to extend points or to mumble together with whomever wants to say something.
Latifit has her hand up. Go ahead.
I think I appreciate thank you so much. My head was kind of charging while you were reading, and we could kind of just witness the stories as you were reciting some of these things. Very poetic, very energetic. It felt really liberating. Like I could feel it. I could feel the voice, the tonality. Um, I liked how you mentioned something around like the vocabularies of naming, particularly across collective sufferings. It calls for um it calls for the promotion of indigenous knowledges, because our sufferings can look similar, but how do we define these sufferings? We don't want outsiders to come and define our sufferings for us. And when you look at this type of topic, we can even use this type of rehearsals to kind of understand even mental health or even social connection. For some people, social connection might mean something, but for some people it does mean something. So I really liked. I just said again, it felt really, really poetic. I like the fact that you said, how can we practice listening that transcends beyond dominant listening? I feel like we listening is kind of like underrated. A lot of people will be like, oh no, we need to be empathetic listeners. I think it goes beyond that, and it's a witnessing of even the listening process, like what is going on, like as I felt like these tonalities. I just like it. Thank you.
Yeah, my response is not that far away. I mean, what Latifat is saying, I was suddenly thinking of pluriverse, perspectives on knowledge and knowledge ecologies as opposed to dominant knowledges and oppressed knowledges or whatever. And I just felt the poetic of what you presented as a sort. I viewed it as a performance, right? It was like a multi-voice performance that took us from largely intellectual conceptualization to very specific experience of the world that we're living in now, which has all these complexities and kind of new fronts, new ways of dealing with things. So I just super appreciated the way you made us think about that. And I'll just say to my community of digital storytelling and social memory technology people, I think there's a lot of ways we recapitulate dominant ideologies, even when we're trying to do nice things, like help people tell a story. And we have to continually challenge ourselves not to get sucked into there's a way to do it, and remain open to the various ways that people tell stories. Obviously, we're talking about indigenous narratives as part of this conference, but there's, we have to have plural versal perspective, and it's not easy. All of us fall into patterns quite easily. Oh, this is the way you do it, and this is how you tell a story, and how it's been done. And I think we can't really achieve liberatory practices unless we let go of the way our brains have been shaped by dominant ideology perspective. So that's my response. So Latifat, I think we think the same thing. It was beautifully done. Other thoughts?
I had a couple of thoughts. I just really appreciated the framework as weaving. I thought that was a nice way to kind of prepare for what happened, and thinking about, not so much how do these things like fit together, but how do they work together? And I feel like I am a lot of the times trying to work through like I'm a US based person, and so like what's happened in the US, but like also the way that the US affects like around the world, and the other societies have a shared sort of different but shared colonized history. And like how do we interact with these spaces, these ideas, because they are here. And so I really appreciated just the like walking through some of those things, and also sort of a casting to the future and these things talking back to each other. I was curious on just like, did you write the pieces with sort of this set in mind? And this is my first time hearing about cosmograms. That was something very interesting. That I'm like, how, do these things, how does that work exactly? But did you write the pieces in response to the cosmogram, or did you like how did that work? How did you put this together?
You mean like overall or within just the cosmograms or
The in choosing which stories to put, which ones fit into the first, the second, the third, were they inspired by a shared thought or by those cards, or were the cards just a separate thing and you put them together?
Yeah, so the cards were, yeah, because I started, so it sounded that maybe my cards were inspiring everyone else, but it was mostly the story that I was writing was based on the cards. And then each practice is basically decided on like 3 rehearsals, or how each of us practice in a daily basis. I think that was the idea, and we wanted to share 3 stories of that practice. So my practice was based on these cards and making this cosmogram, like a tarot card, and Roberta was story of the listenings, and Christina and Yara were like rehearsing their experience with drop-ins, which were like sites experiments, right? Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
I think this was all, I mean, in itself a rehearsal. Thank you all 3 for the comments and thoughts. I think the big question for us was how to stay with the complexity of the different inquiries that we each try to hold and host. And Latifa talks about tonalities, which I really appreciate also. Ways to hear high and low, ways to listen high and low. And the idea, I think, for us was to put our practices, instead of flattening them and trying to answer specifically to each practice or try to conform each practice to a specific explanation, but to try and actually sit with that complexity of each of our questions, and weaving with each other to try and feel some kind of solidarity also in, when I hear Guillemette, I'm trying to find myself and my own questions, and when I hear Hada, when I hear Christina, for different reasons, I'm trying to identify and relocate and locate my practice and myself in them, through them, without actually naming perhaps it this way. I think Latifa also talked about this, how do we speak of what we witness without trying to incorporate that other body, that otherness, but actually reflecting onto ourselves. So I think this was a trial to do that, to also hear each other, listen to each other in a room of and with others whom we also do not know. Yeah, I think the performative does come through because it becomes a public reading. There is always that performative aspect of sitting in a public room, and that I think exists already, even when we were trying to put these these stories together, because we are 4 different bodies, 4 different places, and I think the performative can be generative, but sometimes unnecessary, you know, depending on the struggle that we're living with. Yeah, I'll stop. I can talk for a long time, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe, and also thank you so much for the reflections that the 3 of you just shared. Maybe one thing to share is from our side is that it is indeed the rehearsing attitude is very central to what we tried today. One, because it is about combining our reflections on methods that involve storytelling, but from very different practices and often like not shared experiences shared in the immediate. So we gathered for preparing the panel and the contents for them. So we have been in conversation from the beginning. So in that sense, it's wefted, but what we carried in our pockets was really different experiences, and that's the staying with complexity that Roberta is referencing to also, like in the very making of the panel. So like an ongoing attention or syncing, I would say, like synchronizing between us to somehow like let go perhaps of certain elements of the very like situated or specificities of each of those stories that are being shared, but also not fully. Somehow like also like try to make them shapeshift and even at some point use each other's vocabularies. So we have been also porous in the languaging as a kind of ongoing praxis.
I just wanted to add something real quick. I think also we need to appreciate the reading, because the reading came with different type of, like beyond just the tonality, people's distinct ways of pronunciation in their own confidence, right? Where we're not kind of looking at this is how you pronounce this word over that word, but we could still feel it, we could still understand the lingua or the language, even though it's in English, right? But I think this is a framing from a decolonial reading standpoint, where cultural identities are being enhanced through this kind of rehearsal reading or recitation. So I think we need to reiterate that point, that it gives us that, it gives us that, or even the reader, that confidence that, this is my reading and this is how I sound and it's okay, right? It's not one way to say, if I call water, water, what if I say it's water? Or if I call Africa, Africa, what if I say it's Africa, So I really wanted to reframe that, but thank you.
Thank you about that. Cheers.
Indeed, and what we produce and reproduce in how we sound also. Yeah.
Can I ask, how often are you doing these rehearsals? I mean, is this a touring, a touring performative thing that you were trying in different things, or was this a unique? I didn't get a sense of that.
That's a great question. It's a good question because we have to answer it through the the different environments, I think, where we have the possibility to voice our practices and also the demands of the different environments where the infrastructures, whether it's, a PhD cohort or whether it's a symposium, a conference, whether it's sitting with each other. So we've had some opportunities. I mean, my practice is a lot of a writing practice, a listening and a writing practice. And a lot happens in the room when I have the possibility to recite. And of course, depending on who is listening, who is willing to listen and to engage in this materiality, also that the words do. But how often we do this? I mean, together we had never done this in this way. We had no idea if the weaving would actually produce or generate something, a disconcerted meaning, perhaps. I mean, I see the weaving as generating something, but I also have, like Yemet and I have sat together for a few years now in certain circumstances. Hara, I have very little contact with, but Christina is starting to know her practice. So together is actually the first time. So this is once again a rehearsal. And individually, I think depends on. I think we all have been voicing this past year and past few years as often as possible, but not always, perhaps, reverberating in the way that we would maybe want or feel comfortable. There's maybe a lot of discomfort also when voicing.
Maybe to add that in the case of Hara and I, we are also part of a larger collective called Infrastructural Rehearsals. And so the words that we were reading out are not always ours. They are also from other people in the group. And I think this is also within at least this group, also how we rehearse our practices. We also rehearse each other's practices and other people from our network's practices. So the dedoubling, or not only rehearsing our own work, but also work of our friends with each other and adapting it to different environments is maybe part of the infrastructural work that we like to do.
And maybe also to add on this, I love how the notion of rehearsal is actually staying very ambiguous. To reply to your question, Joe, because this is part of the politics of using this notion of rehearsal, and sometimes it might risk taking like perhaps a too scenographic tone or a too like dramatic kind of meaning, and it's okay. It can cohabit with that kind of cultural landscape. But for us, it is super important that it stays connected with its deep abolitionist commitment, in the sense of rehearsing forms of arrangement of worlds, rejecting a linear and non-renegotiable form of togetherness and of word making. And in that sense, the recursiveness of rehearsal as a techno-societal, but also aesthetical form of staying close to complexity is fundamental in a very relational manner. Beyond perhaps the literary and the mise en scène kind of semantic field.
You know, I have I have so many thoughts that we could spend the next 2 hours talking about what this brings up for me. But, you know, I think in our practices in digital storytelling, kind of bringing it back to this conference, is the notion of centering and decentering, the notion of linearity and non-linearity, the you know, simply the idea of multiple voices instead of singular voices. But I think adding this idea of rehearsing as opposed to creating a permanent entity, document, thing, that we're trying to be in this other world that's hard to create in a world that wants to recolonize, re-erase, you know, to me, this is really interesting, and I think it relates to some of the way we think about the work of digital storytelling is people just practicing where their story is at now. It doesn't mean it's the story. And so much of what we do doesn't get published because it's like, well, I didn't do it to get it published. I did it to go through the process of articulating what I'm experiencing now through a narrative moment or whatever I decide to write about. All of that seems relevant. I'm not sure I can articulate why I think it's relevant, but I sort of appreciate the you know, the confrontation of your thinking with what, you know, we do and how we do it. So again, just deep appreciation. You brought this complexity into our relatively straightforward narrative. Here's what we do and how we do it. This was a completely different engagement. And you're free to say anything. Yeah. All right, somebody else, is Stacy or anybody else want to say something? Lisa, you want to say?
I actually found it kind of mind-boggling with all the images in my head and how layered it was. I actually had to just close my eyes and listen and just take it in through my ears, and that way I could hear all the voices. But I love the truthfulness of your experiment and that you don't make a dominant voice by keeping it a rehearsal. Other things can keep coming in and be improvised upon, and it just has a real beauty to it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Stacy. We thought a lot about sharing. We did share the Access copy also, and we thought, you know, in terms of transparency, it would have been, we had first thought of the script as an image, of the pad as an image that we could all kind of follow together. But that also creates the unlistening, you know, because you're reading and then not listening, and then you're hearing someone's rhythm and trying to follow it. So we remove that with the help of one of our group, one person in the group. And I think in a sense, the idea is to close and listen if you are able to have that, to give yourself that possibility without us maybe proposing that as, you know, this is how you should listen to us. But because of, you know, the way we speak is different, our rhythms are different, our accents are different, our practices are different. It's like, I think the only manner is to actually accentuate the years, because that's the way you can give it attention and the way you can maybe be with it, but also lose some of it and accept that too.
Well, it was very like music that way. So I did feel like that's how I had to receive it, even though some of the images really had a beauty. Like I love the tarot cards and the fire, but that also felt very early life. And I think it brought us to that sort of central storytelling gathering place. So as a place to begin, anyway, I just really admired it, and it was like an experience I've not had. So thank you.
You know, I apologize for my multiple hats that I'm wearing today. I didn't listen as much as I now want to, so I'm glad we recorded this, and thank you for giving us something that we can reflect back on. Appreciation to all of you for your presentation today, and please, you know, keep in touch with what you're working on in our community. Speaking for Story Center that Tamiki and I represent, but also for the larger community. Thank you. Thank you.